The Frostwolfs Oath. Sylvain Mercer had spent her life chasing winter. As a scholar, she had studied every legend, every forgotten kingdom swallowed by snow. But none had spoken of this. A village that wasn't on any maps. A tower untouched by time. And a man waiting at its threshold, his breath curling in the frozen air, his silver eyes burning like embers in the dark. "You are not the first to come here," he said, tilting his head as if listening to something distant. "But you will be the last." Chapter 1. The Uncharted Village. The biting wind whipped at Sylvain's cloak, the snowflakes stinging her cheeks like tiny needles. 62 years, and she'd never felt a cold quite like this. It wasn't just the temperature, which her thermometer stubbornly refused to register below 10 degrees Celsius, a reading she knew was patently false. It was a cold that seeped into your bones, a cold that whispered of ancient things, of secrets buried deep beneath the permafrost. She pulled her fur-lined hood tighter, her breath misting in the frigid air, obscuring the already fading light. She'd been following the barely there trail for hours, the only sound the crunch of her snowshoes on the pristine surface and the frantic beat of her own heart. Doubt, a constant companion for most of her life, gnawed at her. Was this another dead end? Another phantom legend leading her further away from the warmth of a hearth, the comfort of a life she'd deliberately left behind? She adjusted the heavy pack on her back, the weight of her research materials, books, maps, instruments a familiar burden. Sylvain Mercer, Professor Emerita of Folklore and Mythology, had spent her life chasing winters, chasing stories of lands swallowed by ice, of civilizations lost to eternal snow. Her colleagues had called her eccentric, obsessed, even mad. Perhaps they were right. After her husband, Thomas, had passed a gentle, grounding force in her life, taken too soon by a swift and merciless illness, she'd thrown herself into her work with a fervor that bordered on the fanatical. Grief, she discovered, could be a powerful, if isolating, fuel. The trail, which had been little more than a suggestion of flattened snow, suddenly opened into a small clearing. And there it was. A village. Not the crumbling ruins she'd expected, but a cluster of buildings, seemingly untouched by time, their wooden walls dark against the blinding white of the snow-covered landscape. Smoke curled lazily from chimneys, hinting at life, at warmth. It was a scene ripped from the pages of a fairy tale, a place that shouldn't exist, a place that defied all logic and cartography. She'd meticulously checked every map, every historical record, every satellite image. This place was not on any of them. A shiver, this one not entirely from the cold, ran down her spine. This was it. The culmination of years of research, of countless hours spent poring over ancient texts, of chasing whispers and rumors. The legendary village of Eisenthal, said to be hidden in a valley untouched by the sun, guarded by an ancient magic. A place where winter reigned eternal. As she approached, she noticed the details. Intricate carvings adorn the eaves of the houses, depicting scenes of wolves running through frozen forests, of strange, winged creatures soaring through snow-laden skies. The windows, small and square, were made of a material that looked like frosted glass, but shimmered with an inner light. There was an eerie silence, a stillness that was almost unnerving. No dogs barked, no children laughed, no sounds of daily life broke the hushed reverence of the snow-covered world. Then she saw him. He stood before the tallest building in the village, a structure that looked more like a tower than a house, its spire reaching towards the darkening sky like a frozen finger. He was tall, powerfully built, his figure silhouetted against the pale glow emanating from the tower's entrance. He wore clothes that seemed both ancient and timeless, a long coat of dark fur, leather breeches, and boots that reached his knees. His hair, the color of winter moonlight, fell to his shoulders, framing a face that was both strikingly handsome and strangely unsettling. But it was his eyes that captured her attention. They were silver, like polished coins, and they seemed to glow with an inner light, reflecting the faint glimmer of the hidden sun. They held a depth of knowledge, of weariness, that seemed to span centuries. He watched her approach, his expression unreadable, his stance unwavering. As she drew closer, she could smell him, a clean, sharp scent of pine needles and snow, overlaid with something wilder, something untamed. It was a scent that both intrigued and slightly frightened her. He didn't speak until she was just a few feet away, her snowshoes crunching softly on the packed snow. His voice was deep, resonant, with a hint of something that sounded like an echo, a whisper of something older, something beyond human comprehension. "You are not the first to come here," he said, his silver eyes studying her with an intensity that made her feel strangely exposed, as if he could see through her layers of clothing, through her carefully constructed defenses, straight into her soul. He tilted his head slightly, as if listening to something distant, something only he could hear. "But you will be the last." His words, spoken with such calm certainty, sent a fresh wave of unease through her. Sylvain, despite her years of academic detachment, felt a primal fear stir within her. She swallowed, trying to moisten her dry throat. Who are you?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly, betraying the fear she tried to conceal. She cursed her own vulnerability, the way her heart hammered against her ribs. He didn't answer immediately, his gaze sweeping over her, taking in every detail: her worn traveling cloak, her snow-covered boots, the strands of gray hair that had escaped her hood. He seemed to be assessing her, weighing her, deciding something. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and measured. "I am called Kalen. And this," he gestured towards the village with a sweep of his hand, "is Eisenthal. You have found what you were looking for, Professor Mercer. But I fear you may not like what you find." A gust of wind howled through the village, swirling the snow around them in a dizzying dance. Sylvain felt a sudden, overwhelming sense of inevitability. She had stepped into a story, a legend, and she had no idea how to escape. Or if she even wanted to. What would happen next? Chapter 2. Echoes of a Frozen Past. Kalen led her through the silent village, his long strides forcing Sylvain to practically jog to keep up. The snow crunched beneath their boots, the only sound breaking the eerie stillness. The houses, she noticed, were not as pristine up close as they had appeared from a distance. There were subtle signs of age, of wear, cracks in the wood, a slight sag to the roofs. But they were still remarkably preserved, as if held in a state of suspended animation. He didn't speak, and Sylvain, hesitant to break the silence, focused on her surroundings. The air was thick with a strange, almost palpable energy, a feeling of ancient power that hummed beneath the surface of the frozen landscape. It was a feeling she'd encountered before, in other places of legend, other places steeped in myth and mystery. But here it was amplified, intensified, almost overwhelming. They reached the tower, its entrance a gaping maw of darkness framed by intricately carved wooden doors. Kalen pushed one of the doors open, revealing a dimly lit interior. The air inside was surprisingly warm, carrying the scent of wood smoke and something else, something faintly metallic, like old blood. The entrance hall was vast and circular, the walls lined with shelves filled with ancient-looking books and scrolls. A massive fireplace dominated one side of the room, a fire roaring within, casting flickering shadows on the walls. In the center of the room, a spiral staircase, crafted from dark, polished wood, wound its way upwards, disappearing into the shadows above. Kalen gestured towards a worn armchair placed near the fire. "Sit, Professor." "You must be cold." Sylvain hesitated for a moment, then sank into the chair, the warmth of the fire seeping into her chilled bones. She watched Kalen as he moved around the room, his movements fluid and graceful, like a predator in its natural habitat. He poured a steaming liquid from a copper kettle into 2 mugs, the aroma of herbs and spices filling the air. He handed her a mug. "Drink. It will warm you." She took a tentative sip. The liquid was hot and fragrant, a blend of unfamiliar flavors that soothed her throat and warmed her from the inside out. It tasted of winter berries, of pine needles, of something wild and untamed, like the man who had made it. "Thank you," she said, her voice still slightly hoarse. Kalen sat down in a chair opposite her, his silver eyes fixed on her face. You came seeking Eisental, he said, his voice low and resonant.
Why?
Sylvain took another sip of the drink, gathering her courage. I've studied legends of lost civilizations, of places hidden from the world, for my entire career. Eisental, it was always considered a myth, a fairy tale. But I found references, fragments of stories, hints of its existence in ancient texts. I had to see if it was real. A flicker of something amusement? Sadness? Crossed Kaelin's face. And now that you have found it? I don't know, Sylvain admitted. It's more than I expected. It's unsettling. Unsettling? Kaelin raised an eyebrow. Because it defies your logic, your scientific understanding of the world? Partly, Sylvain said. But it's more than that. There's a feeling here. A sense of waiting. Of something impending. Kaelin leaned forward, his eyes locking with hers. You are perceptive, Professor. More perceptive than most. He paused, his gaze dropping to the fire, his expression turning somber. Eisental is not a place of peace, Professor. It is a place of captivity. A prison, if you will. Sylvain's heart skipped a beat. A prison? For whom? For all of us, Kaelin said, his voice barely above a whisper. We are bound to this place, trapped by an ancient curse. A curse that has held us captive for centuries. He stood up and walked to the fireplace, staring into the flames. The curse of everlasting winter, he said, his voice echoing in the vast chamber. It was laid upon this village by a sorceress, a woman scorned by the man she loved. She bound us to this valley, to this eternal winter, unable to leave, unable to die a natural death. Sylvain felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. The story sounded like something out of a dark fairy tale, a legend she might have dismissed as mere folklore had she not been standing in the very place where it was said to have happened. But you? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. You don't seem trapped. Kaelin turned back to her, a flicker of pain in his silver eyes. I am different, he said. I am the guardian of Eisental, the one who must ensure the curse remains unbroken. He looked at her, his gaze piercing. And the one to tell you, there is no escape from Eisental. Not for you. Not for anyone. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The warmth she had felt earlier was gone, replaced by a chilling dread. How had she, a seasoned scholar, a woman of logic and reason, stumbled into such a nightmare? And more importantly, with that bleak, heartbreaking pronouncement echoing in her mind, what possible hope remained? Chapter 3. The Scent of Pine and Snow. The silence that followed Kaelin's pronouncement was heavy, suffocating. Sylvain felt as though the air had been sucked from the room, leaving her struggling to breathe. She gripped the mug in her hands, the warmth of the ceramic a small comfort against the icy fear that was creeping through her veins. No escape? She repeated, her voice barely a whisper. The words felt foreign, unreal, like a line from a play she hadn't agreed to be a part of. Kaelin's gaze was unwavering, his silver eyes filled with a sorrow that seemed to echo through the centuries. None, he confirmed, his voice devoid of any hint of hope. She wanted to argue, to demand an explanation, to find a loophole in his pronouncements. She was a scholar, a researcher, a woman who believed in logic and reason. There had to be a solution, a way out. But the look on his face, the weight of his words, the oppressive atmosphere of the tower, all conspired to silence her. He moved closer, his presence filling the space between them. She could smell him again, that clean, sharp scent of pine needles and snow, overlaid with a wilder, more primal undertone. It was a scent that should have been comforting, grounding, but now it only served to heighten her unease. It was the scent of the wild, of the untamed, of the very curse that held them captive. He knelt before her, his eyes level with hers. I know this is difficult to accept, he said, his voice softening slightly. But you must understand. The curse is not something that can be broken easily. It is woven into the very fabric of this place, into the land, into the air we breathe. Sylvain looked into his eyes, searching for any sign of deception, any hint that he was lying. But she found only sincerity, a deep, a biting sadness that resonated with her own growing despair. She saw something else, too, something that flickered beneath the surface of his stoic demeanor. A flicker of loneliness?
But why?
She asked, her voice trembling. Why tell me this? Why not just let me believe I could leave? He reached out, his hand hovering just inches from her cheek. She flinched, instinctively pulling back. He didn't touch her, but she could feel the warmth radiating from his hand, a warmth that seemed to defy the eternal winter that surrounded them. Because, he said, his voice low and husky, you're different. You see things that others do not. You feel things that others cannot. And I am tired of being alone. His words, spoken with such raw honesty, struck her with unexpected force. She understood loneliness. She'd lived with it for years, ever since Thomas had died. It was a constant ache, a void that nothing seemed to fill. And she saw that same ache reflected in Kaelin's eyes, magnified by centuries of isolation. She found herself reaching out, her hand trembling as she gently touched his. His skin was warm, surprisingly so, given the cold that permeated everything else in Eisenthal. The contact sent a jolt of something unexpected through her, a spark of warmth that spread through her chilled body. It was a feeling she hadn't experienced in years, a feeling she thought she'd lost forever. He looked at her, his silver eyes searching hers. There is a power in you, Sylvain, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. A power that could change things. But it is a dangerous power, a power that could destroy you if you're not careful. Sylvain frowned. What power? I'm just a scholar, an old woman who chases legends. He smiled, a sad, wistful smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. You are more than that, Sylvain. Much more. And in time you will understand. He withdrew his hand, the warmth disappearing, leaving her feeling strangely bereft. For now, you must rest. You are safe here in the tower. No harm will come to you. He stood up, his tall figure casting a long shadow across the room. I will show you to your chambers. Sylvain followed him, her mind reeling. His words, his touch, the strange energy that seemed to emanate from him, had stirred something within her, something she thought had long been dormant. Fear, yes, but also something else. Something that felt dangerously close to hope? Or was it simply the desperate yearning of a lonely heart, reaching out for connection in the face of despair? The question haunted her, a chilling echo in the silent ascent up the winding stairs. What lay ahead in this frozen prison? Chapter 4. A Touch of Silver. The chambers Kaelin led her to were surprisingly luxurious, a stark contrast to the austere exterior of the tower. The room was circular, like the entrance hall below, the walls lined with tapestries depicting scenes of winter landscapes, of wolves howling at the moon, of figures cloaked in fur and ice. A large four-poster bed, draped with thick furs, dominated the center of the room, and a fire crackled merrily in a hearth carved into the stone wall. These were the chambers of the previous Guardian's consort, Kaelin said, his voice echoing slightly in the high-ceilinged room. He avoided her gaze, his expression unreadable. Sylvain felt a strange pang of something. Jealousy? No, that was absurd. She barely knew the man. But the thought of him with another, of sharing this intimate space with someone else, caused a tightening in her chest that she couldn't quite explain. She died a long time ago, Kaelin continued, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. The curse, it takes its toll, even on those who are meant to uphold it. Sylvain looked at him, searching his face for any sign of grief, of loss. But his expression was carefully guarded, his silver eyes veiled. She wondered about the woman who had shared this room with him, about her life, her death. Had she loved him? Had he loved her? I'm sorry, she said, the words feeling inadequate. He shrugged, a dismissive gesture that didn't quite mask the flicker of pain in his eyes. It is the way of things in Eisenthal, he said. Life and death are intertwined. We are all prisoners of time, in our own way. He walked to the window, a small, circular opening that offered a breathtaking view of the snow-covered valley below. The moon, full and bright, cast a silvery glow over the landscape, illuminating the frozen trees, the silent houses, the pristine expanse of white. "It is beautiful, isn't it?" he said, his voice soft, almost wistful. "But beauty can be deceiving. It can hide a darkness, a cruelty, that is all the more potent for its disguise." Sylvain joined him at the window, her gaze following his. She had to admit it was beautiful. The stark, unforgiving beauty of a winter landscape, a beauty that held a hint of danger, of wildness. It was a beauty that resonated with something deep within her, something she hadn't realized was there. "I've always loved winter," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The quiet, the stillness, the way it transforms the world into something magical." He turned to her, his silver eyes reflecting the moonlight. "Magic," he repeated, the word sounding like a curse on his lips. "It is magic that has cursed us, Sylvain. Magic that has trapped us in this endless winter." He reached out, his fingers brushing against a silver ring she wore on her left hand, a ring that had belonged to Thomas. It was a simple band of silver, adorned with a single, small snowflake. "This ring," he said, his voice low and husky. "It is familiar." Sylvain felt a jolt of surprise. "It was my husband's," she said. "He gave it to me before he died." Kaelin's fingers traced the outline of the snowflake, his touch sending a shiver down her spine. "It is an ancient symbol," he said. "A symbol of protection, of resilience, of hope." He looked at her, his gaze intense. "You wear it well, Sylvain. It suits you." She felt her cheeks flush under his scrutiny. She hadn't worn the ring for its symbolic meaning, but simply because it was a tangible reminder of Thomas, of the love they had shared. But hearing Kaelin's words, seeing the way he looked at her, she felt a strange sense of connection. Not just to Thomas, but to Kaelin, to this place, to this strange, frozen world. He withdrew his hand, the warmth disappearing, leaving her feeling cold again. "You should rest," he said. "The journey has been long, and you will need your strength." He turned to leave, his figure silhouetted against the firelight. "I will check on you in the morning," he said, his voice hesitant. "Kaelin," Sylvain said, stopping him before he reached the door. "Thank you for telling me the truth, for not leaving me in the dark." He paused, his hand on the door handle. He didn't turn around, but she could sense the tension in his body. "The truth is a dangerous thing, Sylvain," he said. "It can be a burden, a curse, but it is also the only way to find freedom, even in a place like Eisenthal." He opened the door and slipped out, leaving her alone in the silence of the room. She stood there for a long time, staring at the closed door, his words echoing in her mind. The truth, freedom, hope. Were those things even possible in this frozen prison? And what was the connection, however fleeting and confusing, which had sparked between them? As she finally turned to face the awaiting for a laden bed, she felt sleep tugging at her mind, but within the tug was a coil of questions, of uncertainties, and the chilling premonition of something vast and inevitable unfolding. Chapter 5. Whispers in the Frozen Wind. Sleep, when it finally came, was fitful and filled with strange, unsettling dreams. Sylvain dreamt of wolves running through snow-covered forests, of a woman with eyes of ice and a heart of stone, of a man with silver eyes who whispered her name on the frozen wind. She woke with a start, her heart pounding, her body drenched in a cold sweat. The fire in the hearth had burned down to embers, casting the room in a dim, flickering light. The silence was profound, broken only by the occasional creak of the ancient timbers. She sat up in bed, pulling the thick furs around her, trying to shake off the lingering unease of her dreams. The dreams had felt so real, so vivid, as if she had been transported to another time, another place. She remembered the woman with the icy eyes, the sorceress who had laid the curse upon Eisenthal. She had felt her anger, her pain, her despair, as if it were her own. And she had felt the connection to Kaelin, a connection that transcended time and space, a connection that both terrified and intrigued her. She got out of bed, her bare feet sinking into the thick rug that covered the floor. She walked to the window, drawn by the pale light of the pre-dawn sky. The moon had set, and the valley below was shrouded in a soft, ethereal mist. It was a scene of breathtaking beauty, a beauty that was both captivating and unsettling. As she stood there, gazing out at the frozen landscape, she heard a faint whisper, a voice carried on the wind. It seemed to be calling her name, a soft, mournful sound that sent a shiver down her spine. She strained her ears, trying to make out the words, but the whisper was too faint, too elusive. She pressed her forehead against the cold glass of the window, her breath fogging the surface. Was it just her imagination, a product of her restless sleep and the strange, unsettling atmosphere of Eisenthal? Or was it something more? Was it the voice of the sorceress, calling to her from across the centuries? Or was it Kalen, reaching out to her in his dreams? She didn't know, but the whisper, the feeling of being watched, of being called, lingered in the air, a subtle reminder of the mysteries that surrounded her. She turned away from the window, her gaze falling on the silver ring on her finger. She touched it, tracing the outline of the snowflake, remembering Kalen's words. A symbol of protection, of resilience, of hope. Hope. It seemed like a fragile, almost foolish thing to cling to in this place, in this situation. But she couldn't deny the flicker of it that had been ignited within her, a flicker that had been fueled by her dreams, by her connection to Kalen, by the strange, unsettling beauty of Eisenthal. She dressed quickly, pulling on the warm clothes she had brought with her, clothes that seemed woefully inadequate against the eternal winter of this place. She needed to talk to Kalen, to understand more about the curse, about his role in it, about the power he had hinted at within her. She left the chambers, her footsteps echoing in the silent corridor. She descended the spiral staircase, her hand trailing along the smooth, polished wood. The entrance hall was empty, the fire in the hearth reduced to a pile of glowing embers. She found Kalen in the library, surrounded by books and scrolls. He was sitting at a large wooden table, his head bent over an ancient-looking tome, his brow furrowed in concentration. He looked up as she entered, his silver eyes widening slightly in surprise. "Sylvain," he said, his voice a low rumble. "You are awake early." "I couldn't sleep," she said, her voice hesitant. "I had dreams." He closed the book, his gaze fixed on her face. "Dreams?" he repeated. "Tell me." She told him about the wolves, about the woman with the icy eyes, about the whisper on the wind. She told him about the feeling of connection, of being called, of being watched. He listened intently, his expression unreadable. When she had finished, he remained silent for a long moment, his gaze sweeping over her, as if searching for something. "The curse is reaching out to you," he said finally, his voice low and grave. "It senses your power, your connection to this place." "But what does it mean?" Sylvain asked, her voice trembling. "What am I supposed to do?" Kalen stood up and walked towards her, his movements fluid and graceful. He stopped just inches from her, his presence filling the space between them. "It means," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "that you are not just a visitor to Eisenthal, Sylvain. You are a part of it, and your destiny is intertwined with ours." He placed a hand lightly on her arm, and the contact sent a jolt, warm and compelling, up through her. What was to become of her, here, bound to a cursed village, and a man who carried the weight of centuries on his shoulders? A chilling uncertainty, cut by that strange warmth from his touch, filled her as the dawn began to break. Chapter 6. The Curse of Everlasting Winter. Kalen led her to a smaller room off the main library, a room filled with maps, charts, and strange, arcane instruments. A large table dominated the center of the room, covered with a detailed map of the valley, a map that was far more intricate than any she had ever seen. "This," Kalen said, gesturing towards the map, "is Eisenthal. Not just the village, but the entire valley. It is a world unto itself, sealed off from the outside by the curse." Sylvain studied the map, her eyes tracing the contours of the mountains, the frozen rivers, the dense forests. She noticed details that were not present on any of the maps she had consulted, details that seemed to defy logic and geography. "The curse," Kalen continued, his voice echoing in the small room, was laid upon us by a woman named Lyra. She was a powerful sorceress, a descendant of an ancient line of beings who possessed the ability to control the elements. She fell in love with a man from the village, a warrior named Alaric. But Alaric, he did not return her love. He was betrothed to another, a woman from his own clan. Sylvain listened intently, her mind piecing together the fragments of the story, the familiar tropes of love, betrayal, and revenge. Lyra, consumed by grief and rage, used her powers to curse the village, to bind it to an eternal winter. She trapped Alaric, his betrothed, and all the inhabitants of Eisental within the valley, unable to leave, unable to die a natural death. She vowed that they would suffer as she had suffered, that they would feel the coldness of her heart for all eternity. And Alaric? Sylvain asked, her voice soft. What happened to him? Kaelin's gaze darkened. He was transformed. Lyra, in her fury, twisted his form, turning him into a creature of the winter, a guardian of the curse. He became the first Frostwolf. Sylvain's heart skipped a beat. Frostwolf, she repeated. The name resonated with something deep within her, a primal fear, a sense of recognition. Kaelin nodded. A creature of immense power, bound to the will of the curse. He was tasked with ensuring that the curse remained unbroken, that no one ever escaped Eisental. And you? Sylvain asked, her voice trembling. Are you? Kaelin's silver eyes met hers. I am his descendant, he said, his voice low and measured. The blood of the Frostwolf flows in my veins. I am the current guardian of Eisental. I am bound to this place, just as Alaric was, just as all the others are. Sylvain felt a wave of dizziness, of disbelief. The story was fantastical, unbelievable, yet she knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that it was true. She looked at Kaelin, at his silver eyes, at his strong, stoic features, and she saw the wolf within, the creature of the winter, the guardian of the curse. But why haven't you changed? She asked, her voice hesitant. Why are you still human?
Kaelin smiled, a sad, wistful smile.
The transformation is not immediate. It is a gradual process, a slow erosion of the soul. It happens over time, and it is triggered by strong emotions. Love, hate, grief, they all accelerate the process. He looked at her, his gaze intense. That is why I must remain detached. Why I must avoid attachments. Sylvain felt a pang of something. Pity? Empathy? Fear? She understood his isolation, his loneliness, the burden he carried. She saw the pain in his eyes, the pain of centuries of solitude, of watching others live and die while he remained trapped in this endless winter. But there must be a way, she said, her voice filled with a desperate hope. A way to break the curse. A way to free you. Kaelin shook his head. There is no way, Sylvain. The curse is too strong, too deeply woven into the fabric of this place. It cannot be broken. But your dreams, Sylvain said quickly. My presence. You said I had a power. He stepped closer. Your presence here is a disruption. A ripple in the fabric of the curse. But it is also a danger. To you and to us all. The weight of the curse, the reality of their entrapment, settled upon her. It was almost too much to bear. Yet, in the face of such despair, she felt that persistent, nagging flicker of something. It wasn't quite hope, not yet, but it was a refusal to surrender. What would she do? Chapter 7. Shared Scars, Hidden Truths. The weight of Kaelin's words hung heavy in the air, a suffocating blanket of despair. Sylvain felt her initial surge of defiance, that refusal to surrender, begin to crumble under the weight of his pronouncements. No, she whispered, more to herself than to him. There has to be something. Some loophole, some forgotten detail. She paced the small room, her mind racing, trying to grasp at any shred of possibility. She was a scholar, a researcher. She was trained to find answers, to uncover hidden truths. Kaelin watched her, his expression a mixture of pity and something else. Something that looked almost like admiration? Sylvain, he said softly, his voice cutting through her frantic thoughts. You must understand. I have lived with this curse for centuries. I have searched every text, every scroll, every fragment of lore. There is nothing. No way out. She stopped pacing and turned to face him, her eyes filled with a desperate plea. But you said I was different. That I had a power, he nodded, his silver eyes locking with hers. You do. But that power is not a weapon. It is a connection. A connection to the land, to the magic that flows through this place. It is a power that could amplify the curse as easily as it could weaken it. Amplify it? Sylvain repeated, her voice trembling.
How?
Kalen hesitated, his gaze dropping to the floor. The curse, it feeds on strong emotions. On grief, on loss, on despair. Your presence here, your connection to me, it could strengthen the curse, make it even more unbreakable. Sylvain felt a cold dread creep through her veins. Her connection to Kalen, it was something she couldn't deny. She felt it, a pull, a resonance, that defied logic and reason. It was a connection that had been forged in a few short days, yet it felt as deep and as powerful as any she had ever known. And now, he was telling her that this connection, this spark, could be their undoing. So, what am I supposed to do? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Suppress my emotions? Become numb? Kalen reached out and gently touched her cheek, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw. The contact sent a shiver down her spine, a warmth that spread through her chilled body. No, he said, his voice low and husky. That is not the way. You cannot deny who you are, Sylvain. You cannot suppress your emotions. That would be a death in itself. He withdrew his hand, the warmth disappearing, leaving her feeling strangely bereft. You must learn to control them, to understand them, to use them wisely. He turned away from her and walked to the window, staring out at the frozen landscape. I have made mistakes, he said, his voice barely audible. I have allowed my emotions to consume me. I have lost myself to the curse, more than once. Sylvain joined him at the window, her gaze following his. She saw the pain in his eyes, the pain of centuries of regret, of self-reproach. Tell me, she said softly. Tell me about your mistakes. He hesitated, his body tense. He turned to look at her. There was vulnerability now, raw and exposed. The woman, the one who occupied those chambers before you, her name was Alara. I loved her, he confessed, his voice cracking with emotion. I thought I could protect her from the curse. But I was wrong. My love for her, it only made the curse stronger. It consumed her. It twisted her. She became a creature of the winter, a servant of the curse. I had to end her suffering. Sylvain felt a wave of sympathy, of understanding. She remembered the pain of losing Thomas, the crushing weight of grief. She could only imagine the pain Kalen had endured, the guilt he carried. I'm so sorry, she said, her voice filled with emotion. I understand. He looked at her, his silver eyes searching hers. Do you? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Do you understand the burden of immortality? The curse of watching everyone you love die while you remain trapped in this endless winter. She reached out and gently touched his arm, her fingers lingering on his skin. I understand loss, she said. And I understand loneliness. And I see the pain you carry. You don't have to be alone, Kalen. He closed his eyes, his body trembling. He leaned into her touch, a silent acknowledgement of his need, of his vulnerability. For a moment, they stood there, connected by their shared scars, by their hidden truths. The curse still hung heavy between them, a constant threat. Where could they go from here? The question lingered, a chilling whisper in the frozen air. Chapter 8. The Wolf Within. The moment of shared vulnerability shattered as a sudden, sharp gust of wind rattled the window panes, a sound like the howl of a distant wolf. Kalen stiffened, his body going rigid, his eyes snapping open. What is it? Sylvain asked, her voice filled with alarm. He didn't answer, his gaze fixed on the window, his senses seemingly reaching out beyond the confines of the tower, beyond the village, into the frozen wilderness. "Something is out there," he said, his voice low and tense. "Something hunting." He turned away from the window and strode towards the door, his movements swift and purposeful. "Stay here," he commanded, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Do not leave this room." But Kaelin Sylvain began, her voice filled with protest. He stopped at the door, his hand on the handle. He turned his head slightly, his silver eyes meeting hers. "Trust me, Sylvain," he said, his voice softer, but no less firm. "This is for your own safety." He slipped out of the room, closing the door behind him, leaving Sylvain alone in the silence. She stood there for a moment, her heart pounding, her mind racing. What was out there? What was hunting? And why was Kaelin so afraid? She walked to the window, drawn by an irresistible urge to see what was happening. She peered out into the pre-dawn gloom, her eyes straining to penetrate the swirling mist. She could see nothing, hear nothing, but the feeling of unease, of impending danger, was overwhelming. Then she saw it. A flicker of movement, a shadow shifting in the trees at the edge of the village. It was large, dark, and swift. It moved with a grace and power that was both terrifying and mesmerizing. It was a wolf. But it was no ordinary wolf. It was far larger than any wolf she had ever seen, its fur the color of the shadows, its eyes glowing with an eerie, silver light. It was the Frostwolf, Alaric. Sylvain felt a primal fear grip her heart, a fear that transcended logic and reason. She knew, with a certainty that defied explanation, that this creature was dangerous, that it was the embodiment of the curse, of the eternal winter that held Eisenthal captive. As she watched, the Frostwolf moved closer to the village, its movements silent and stealthy. It was heading towards the tower. Towards her. She backed away from the window, her breath catching in her throat. She remembered Kaelin's words, his warning to stay in the room, to trust him. But she couldn't just stand there, helpless, waiting for the Frostwolf to come for her. She looked around the room, searching for something, anything, that she could use as a weapon. But there was nothing, only books, maps, and arcane instruments. She was defenseless. Then, she remembered the silver ring on her finger, the ring that had belonged to Thomas, the ring that Kaelin had said was a symbol of protection. She touched it, her fingers tracing the outline of the snowflake. Could it protect her from the Frostwolf? Could it offer her some defense against the curse? She didn't know, but she had to try.
She had to do something.
She couldn't just wait for the inevitable. She took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart. She closed her eyes, focusing on the ring, on the image of the snowflake, on the feeling of Thomas's love, on the memory of his strength. She whispered a silent prayer, a plea for protection, a plea for courage, a plea for help. When she opened her eyes, she felt a strange calm settle over her, a sense of resolve. She was still afraid, but she was no longer paralyzed by fear. She was ready to face whatever came. She heard a sound, a low growl, coming from just outside the door. The Frostwolf was here. As the door began to creak open, a silhouette filling the frame, Sylvain stood firm, clutching the ring, a strange and uncertain power building within her. What would happen next? Chapter 9. A dance of shadows and light. The door creaked open, revealing not the monstrous form of the Frostwolf, but Kaelin. He stood in the doorway, his chest heaving, his clothes torn and covered in snow. His face was pale, his silver eyes wide and filled with a mixture of relief and fear. "Sylvain," he gasped, his voice ragged. "Are you all right?" Relief washed over her, so potent it almost buckled her knees. "Kaelin." I saw the Frostwolf. It was coming towards the tower. He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him, his gaze sweeping over her, checking for injuries. "It's gone," he said, his voice still strained. "I drove it back. But it won't stay away for long." Sylvain rushed to him, her hands reaching out to touch him, to reassure herself that he was real, that he was safe. She noticed the blood on his clothes, the deep scratches on his arms. "You're hurt," she said, her voice filled with concern. He waved her away, dismissing her worries.
It's nothing, he said.
Just scratches. The frost wolf, it's getting stronger. The curse, it's growing more powerful. Sylvain felt a surge of guilt, of responsibility. Kaelin had said that her presence here, her connection to him, could amplify the curse. Was she responsible for the Frostwolf's increased strength? Was she putting Kaelin and all of Eisenthal in even greater danger? It's my fault, she said, her voice trembling. I'm making things worse. Kaelin grasped her shoulders, his grip firm but gentle. No, Sylvain, he said, his silver eyes locking with hers. It is not your fault. The curse, it is a force of its own. It is adapting. It is fighting back. But what can we do? She asked, her voice filled with despair. He released her shoulders and turned away, pacing the room, his mind clearly racing. I don't know, he admitted, his voice filled with frustration. I have never seen the curse act like this before. It's unpredictable. It's learning. He stopped pacing and turned back to her, his eyes filled with a sudden determination. But we are not defeated, he said. We will fight back. We will find a way. He walked to the table, his gaze falling on the map of Eisenthal. He traced the contours of the mountains, the frozen rivers, the dense forests. There must be something, he muttered to himself. Some weakness, some vulnerability, something we have overlooked. Sylvain joined him at the table, her gaze following his. She studied the map, her mind searching for any clue, any hint of a solution. Then she saw it. A small, almost imperceptible detail, a symbol hidden amongst the intricate lines of the map. It was a snowflake, identical to the one on her ring. Kaelin, she said, her voice trembling with excitement.
Look.
Here. He leaned closer, his eyes following her finger. He stared at the symbol, his brow furrowed in concentration.
What is it?
He asked. I don't recognize it. It's the same symbol as on my ring, Sylvain said.
The snowflake.
You said it was a symbol of protection, of resilience, of hope. Kaelin's eyes widened. But it's located here, he said, pointing to a spot on the map that corresponded to a remote, mountainous region of the valley. The glacial peak. It is said to be the source of the curse, the place where Lyra first unleashed her power. Maybe it's not just the source of the curse, Sylvain said, her voice filled with a growing hope. Maybe it's also the key to breaking it. Kaelin looked at her, his silver eyes searching hers. He saw the determination in her face, the flicker of hope that had been rekindled. It's a dangerous journey, he said. The glacial peak is treacherous, guarded by the curse's power. It is a place of extreme cold, of unrelenting storms. I know, Sylvain said. But we have to try. We have to do something. He hesitated for a moment, his mind clearly weighing the risks. Then he nodded, his expression resolute. We will go, he said. We will go to the glacial peak. And we will face whatever awaits us. A dance of shadows and light had begun, the shadow of the curse against the growing light of Sylvain's presence. What would the journey reveal? The tension, thick with both danger and a fragile hope, filled the room as they prepared to leave. Chapter 10. The Hunter's Moon. Preparations for the journey to the glacial peak were swift and efficient. Kaelin, despite his injuries, moved with a practiced ease, gathering supplies, checking equipment, his movements betraying a lifetime spent navigating the treacherous landscape of Eisenthal. He provided Sylvain with warmer clothing, thick furs, and sturdy boots, designed to withstand the extreme cold of the mountains. The journey will take several days, he said, his voice serious as he handed her a pair of snowshoes. We will need to travel light, and we will need to be careful. The Frostwolf will be watching, waiting for an opportunity to strike. Sylvain nodded, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and excitement. She had faced danger before, in her academic pursuits, in her travels to remote and often hostile environments. But this was different. This was a danger that was both real and supernatural. A danger that threatened not just her physical well-being, but her very soul. As they were preparing to leave, Kaelin paused, his gaze falling on the silver ring on Sylvain's finger. He reached out and gently touched it, his fingers tracing the outline of the snowflake. "This ring," he said, his voice low and husky. "Keep it close. It may offer you some protection. It is connected to the magic of this place in a way that I do not fully understand." Sylvain nodded, her fingers curling around the ring. It was a tangible reminder of Thomas, of his love, of his strength. And now, it was also a symbol of hope, a connection to Kaelin, to the possibility of breaking the curse. They left the tower under the pale light of the hunter's moon, a full moon that cast long, eerie shadows across the snow-covered landscape. The village was silent, deserted, the inhabitants hidden away in their homes, fearful of the Frostwolf, of the curse that held them captive. As they walked, Kaelin spoke of the glacial peak, of the legends that surrounded it. "It is said to be a place of immense power," he said, his voice echoing in the stillness of the night. "A place where the veil between worlds is thin. A place where anything is possible." He glanced at her, his silver eyes reflecting the moonlight. "It is also a place of great danger," he added. "A place where the curse is at its strongest. We must be prepared for anything." Sylvain shivered, not entirely from the cold. The thought of facing the curse at its source, of confronting the power that had held Eisenthal captive for centuries, was terrifying. But she also felt a sense of determination. She would not be defeated. She would not let fear consume her. As they walked further from the village and higher into the mountains, the trees thinned, replaced by barren rock and ice. The wind howled, whipping the snow into a blinding frenzy. The cold was intense, biting at their exposed skin, seeping into their bones. Kaelin set a relentless pace, his long strides eating up the distance. He seemed tireless, his body attuned to the harsh environment, his senses alert to any sign of danger. Sylvain struggled to keep up, her lungs burning, her muscles aching. But she pushed herself onward, driven by a fierce determination to prove herself, to show Kaelin that she was not just a burden, but a partner in this perilous quest. As they reached a particularly treacherous stretch of icy terrain, Kaelin stopped. "We will rest here for a while," he stated, finding them some shelter behind a large rock formation. He produced some dried meat and a flask of the warming herbal drink. They ate and drank in silence, the wind howling around them, the hunter's moon casting an eerie glow over the desolate landscape. Sylvain looked at Kaelin, at his strong, stoic features, at the weariness in his eyes. She felt a surge of gratitude. He was risking his life for her, for the chance to break the curse, for the hope of freedom. She reached out and gently touched his arm. "Thank you," she said, her voice filled with emotion. For everything." He looked at her, his silver eyes searching hers. He saw the fear, the determination, the affection in her gaze. He reached out and cupped her cheek, his thumb gently stroking her skin. The simple touch was electric. He leaned in, his lips brushing against hers, a brief, hesitant kiss. It was a kiss filled with longing, with regret, with a fragile hope. It spoke of a connection that transcended the curse, a connection that defied the boundaries of time and space. Then, just as suddenly, he pulled away. "We should get moving." The abrupt change, the flicker of something unreadable in his eyes, left Sylvain breathless and confused. The hunter's moon shone down, its light a cold, stark contrast to the fire that had, just for a moment, flared between them. What did that kiss mean? And how could they possibly navigate the treacherous path ahead, both physical and emotional? Chapter 11. Broken Oaths, Fragile Hopes. The kiss, brief and hesitant as it was, lingered in the air between them, an unspoken question, a fragile promise. Sylvain felt her cheeks flush, her heart pounding against her ribs. She didn't know what to say, what to do. The sudden intimacy, the unexpected tenderness, had thrown her off balance, stirring emotions she thought she had buried long ago. Kaelin avoided her gaze, his expression unreadable. He busied himself with packing up their meager supplies, his movements stiff and awkward. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken tension. "Kaelin," Sylvain began, her voice hesitant. He looked up, his silver eyes meeting hers. He saw the confusion, the uncertainty, the longing in her gaze. We should keep moving," he said, his voice gruff, his tone dismissive. "We don't have much time." He turned away and started walking, his long strides setting a brisk pace. Sylvain followed, her mind reeling. She didn't understand his sudden change of mood, his abrupt withdrawal. Had she misread the situation? Had she imagined the tenderness in his touch, the longing in his kiss? She struggled to keep up with him, the icy terrain and the swirling snow making the going difficult. The wind howled around them, a mournful sound that echoed the turmoil in her heart. She wanted to ask him about the kiss, about what it meant, but she couldn't find the words. She was afraid of his answer, afraid of rejection, afraid of shattering the fragile connection that had formed between them. As they climbed higher into the mountains, the landscape became even more desolate, more unforgiving. The trees were gone completely, replaced by barren rock and vast expanses of ice. The wind was relentless, whipping the snow into a blinding frenzy. The cold was intense, seeping into their bones, making every step an agony. Sylvain began to doubt their mission, to question the wisdom of their journey. Was it truly possible to break the curse? Or were they chasing a phantom, a foolish hope that would only lead to their destruction? She looked at Kalen, at his determined stride, at his unwavering gaze. He seemed undeterred by the harsh conditions, by the looming danger. He was driven by a fierce resolve, a belief in the possibility of freedom that she desperately wanted to share. "Kalen," she said, her voice barely audible above the howling wind. Do you really believe we can do this?" He didn't answer immediately, his gaze fixed on the path ahead. He seemed to be wrestling with his own doubts, his own fears. "I don't know," he admitted finally, his voice low and strained. "But I have to try. I have to believe. For Eisenthal. For us." His words, spoken with such raw honesty, struck her with unexpected force. He wasn't just fighting for the freedom of Eisenthal. He was fighting for their future, for the possibility of a life together, a life beyond the curse. She reached out and gently touched his arm, her fingers lingering on his skin. "We'll do it together," she said, her voice filled with a renewed determination. "We have to." He looked at her, his silver eyes searching hers. He saw the unwavering belief in her gaze, the strength that she drew from their connection. He nodded, his expression resolute. "Together," he repeated. As they continued their ascent, they came across a crumbling ruin, a remnant of an ancient structure that had once stood on this remote mountain pass. The stones were covered in ice and snow, but Sylvain could make out intricate carvings, depicting scenes of wolves, of warriors, of a woman with flowing hair and eyes that seemed to glow with an inner light. This was Lyra's sanctuary," Kalen said, his voice hushed with reverence. "A place where she came to commune with the elements, to draw upon their power." Sylvain felt a shiver run down her spine. The air here was thick with a strange energy, a palpable sense of ancient magic. She could almost feel Lyra's presence, her anger, her pain, her despair. As they explored the ruins, Kalen found a hidden chamber, a small, circular room that was surprisingly well preserved. In the center of the room, there was a stone altar, covered in strange symbols and runes. This is where it happened," Kalen said, his voice trembling with emotion. "This is where Lyra unleashed the curse." He walked to the altar, his hand hovering over the symbols. He closed his eyes, his body swaying slightly. He seemed to be listening, sensing something that Sylvain could not perceive. "I can feel it," he whispered. "The power, it's still here. It's dormant. But it's waiting." Sylvain felt a growing sense of unease, of impending danger. She had a feeling that they were treading on sacred ground, that they were disturbing forces that were best left undisturbed. Suddenly, Kalen's eyes snapped open. He turned to Sylvain, his face pale, his silver eyes wide with alarm. He grabbed her arm, his grip tight and urgent. "We need to leave. Now." What triggered his sudden alarm? The mystery pressed on them, a heavy weight added to the physical strain of the journey. Chapter 12. Beneath the Ice, A Burning Heart. Kaelin's grip on her arm was almost painful, his urgency palpable. Sylvain didn't question him, didn't hesitate. She trusted his instincts, his knowledge of this cursed land.
What is it?
She asked, her voice breathless as they scrambled out of the hidden chamber, back into the howling wind and swirling snow. The Frostwolf, he said, his voice strained. It's close. And it's different. Stronger. More cunning. They hurried through the ruins, their footsteps crunching on the icy ground. The wind seemed to be mocking them, whipping their cloaks around them, making it difficult to see, to breathe. As they emerged from the ruins, Sylvain saw it. The Frostwolf. It stood on a ridge above them, its massive form silhouetted against the pale moonlight. Its fur was no longer the color of shadows, but a shimmering, silvery white, like the ice that covered the mountains. Its eyes glowed with an intense, almost blinding light. It was a creature of breathtaking beauty, of terrifying power. It was the embodiment of the curse, of the eternal winter that held Eisenthal captive. The Frostwolf let out a howl, a sound that echoed through the mountains, a sound that seemed to tear at Sylvain's soul. It was a sound of rage, of despair, of challenge. Kaelin pushed Sylvain behind him, his body shielding her from the Frostwolf's gaze. He drew a long, curved blade from beneath his cloak, a blade that shimmered with a faint, silvery light. "Stay behind me," he commanded, his voice low and tense. "And whatever happens, do not interfere." Sylvain wanted to protest, to argue, but she knew that he was right. She was no match for the Frostwolf. She would only be a hindrance, a liability. She watched as Kaelin faced the Frostwolf, his stance firm, his blade held ready. He was a warrior, a guardian, a protector. He was the embodiment of resistance, of defiance, of hope. The Frostwolf lunged, its massive form moving with incredible speed. Kaelin met its attack, his blade deflecting the creature's claws, sparks flying where steel met ice. They fought, a whirlwind of fur and steel, a dance of death under the pale moonlight. Sylvain watched, her heart pounding, her breath caught in her throat. She felt helpless, useless, terrified. She saw Kaelin stumble, his foot slipping on the icy ground. The Frostwolf seized the opportunity, its jaws snapping shut on Kaelin's arm. Sylvain cried out, her voice lost in the howling wind. She couldn't just stand there and watch him die. She had to do something. She remembered the ring on her finger, the symbol of protection, of resilience, of hope. She clutched it, her fingers closing around the cold metal. She closed her eyes, focusing on the image of the snowflake, on the feeling of Thomas's love, on the memory of his strength. She whispered a silent prayer, a plea for help, a plea for power, a plea for intervention. Suddenly, she felt a surge of energy, a warmth that spread through her body, a tingling sensation that started in her fingertips and radiated outward. She felt a connection to the land, to the magic that flowed through this place, a connection that was stronger, more potent than anything she had ever experienced before. She opened her eyes, her gaze fixed on the Frostwolf. She felt a surge of anger, of defiance, of righteous fury. She would not let this creature win. She would not let it destroy Kaelin, destroy Eisenthal, destroy their hope. She raised her hand, her palm facing the Frostwolf. She felt the energy building within her, a force that was both terrifying and exhilarating. She spoke, her voice amplified by the wind, by the magic that flowed through her. "Stop." The word echoed through the mountains, a command that brooked no argument. The Frostwolf froze, its jaws still clamped on Kaelin's arm. It turned its head, its glowing eyes fixed on Sylvain. It was as if time stood still. The wind died down. The snow ceased to fall. The only sound was the ragged breathing of Kaelin, the faint crackling of the ice beneath their feet. Sylvain felt a surge of power. The curse, or at least a part of it, was listening to her. Beneath the layers of ice and snow, and the layers of fear and doubt, a burning heart beat strong. What would she do with this newfound power? And what would be the cost? Chapter 13. The Price of Forbidden Love. The Frostwolf remained frozen, its glowing eyes fixed on Sylvain, its massive form poised as if caught mid-stride. The air crackled with tension, with the raw, untamed power that flowed between them. Sylvain felt a surge of exhilaration, of triumph. She had stopped the Frostwolf, she had defied the curse, she had saved Kaelin. But the triumph was short-lived. She felt a sharp pain in her chest, a burning sensation that spread through her body, a feeling of exhaustion, of depletion. The power that had surged through her was fading, leaving her feeling weak, vulnerable. Kaelin, taking advantage of the Frostwolf's momentary paralysis, wrenched his arm free from its jaws. He staggered back, his face pale, his arm bleeding profusely. He looked at Sylvain, his silver eyes wide with a mixture of awe and fear. "Sylvain, what did you do?" She couldn't answer, her voice caught in her throat. She felt dizzy, disoriented, her vision blurring. She stumbled, her legs giving way beneath her. Kaelin caught her before she fell, his arms wrapping around her, holding her close.
"Sylvain,
"Are you all right?" She leaned against him, her body trembling.
I don't know," she whispered.
"I felt something. A power, it came from the ring." Kaelin looked at the silver ring on her finger, his brow furrowed in concern. "The ring, it amplified the curse's magic," he said, his voice strained. "It allowed you to tap into its power. But it also drained you. It took something from you." Sylvain felt a cold dread creep through her veins. She had used the curse's power, she had defied its will. But at what cost? What had she sacrificed? The Frostwolf, recovering from its momentary paralysis, let out a roar of rage, a sound that shook the very ground beneath their feet. It lunged at them, its claws extended, its jaws gaping. Kaelin pushed Sylvain behind him, his body shielding her from the attack. He raised his blade, ready to defend her, to sacrifice himself for her. But the Frostwolf didn't attack. It stopped just inches from them, its glowing eyes fixed on Sylvain. It seemed to be studying her, assessing her, its gaze filled with a strange mixture of curiosity and respect. Then it did something unexpected. It lowered its head, its massive form bowing before Sylvain. It was a gesture of submission, of acknowledgement. Sylvain felt a surge of confusion, of disbelief. The Frostwolf, the embodiment of the curse, was bowing to her?
"Why?"
Kaelin lowered his blade, his eyes wide with astonishment. It recognizes you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It sees you as a part of the curse, as its equal." Sylvain didn't understand. She wasn't a part of the curse. She was a scholar, an old woman, a visitor to this cursed land. But she felt a connection to the Frostwolf, a connection that transcended logic and reason. She felt its pain, its loneliness, its longing for freedom. She reached out and gently touched the Frostwolf's massive head, her fingers sinking into its thick, silvery fur. The contact sent a jolt of energy through her, a warmth that spread through her chilled body. The Frostwolf closed its eyes, its body trembling. It seemed to be drawing strength from her touch, from her connection to the curse. It needs you," Kaelin said, his voice filled with awe. You can heal it. You can free it." Sylvain looked at Kaelin, her eyes filled with a desperate plea. "But how?" He shook his head. "I don't know. But I believe you can. You have the power, Sylvain. You are the key." The forbidden love, the connection between them, was intertwined with the curse. Sylvain's actions had revealed a deeper truth, a power she didn't understand, a responsibility she didn't want. But she also knew that she could not abandon the Frostwolf and, by association, Kaelin. Could not turn away. What was she to do, caught between her own human limitations and this vast, ancient magic? The Frostwolf nuzzled her, the gesture surprisingly gentle. The choice and its consequences were hers alone. Chapter 14. Echoes of Betrayal. The Frostwolf's unexpected submission, its gentle nuzzling against Sylvain, left her reeling. She felt a strange mix of emotions, fear, awe, confusion, and a growing sense of responsibility. She was no longer just a visitor to Eisenthal, a scholar studying a forgotten legend. She was a player in this ancient drama, a key to unlocking the curse, a savior. Kalen watched her, his silver eyes filled with a mixture of hope and trepidation. He knew the power she possessed, the connection she had to the curse, but he also knew the dangers, the risks. He had seen firsthand what the curse could do, how it could twist and corrupt, how it could destroy. Sylvain, he said, his voice low and urgent. You must be careful. The curse is seductive. It will offer you power, it will promise you freedom, but it will also demand a price. She looked at him, her eyes searching his. What price? She asked, her voice trembling. He hesitated, his gaze dropping to the ground. He knew the answer, but he was afraid to speak it, afraid to shatter the fragile hope that had been kindled between them. The price is your humanity, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. The curse it feeds on emotions, on love. The more you use its power, the more it will consume you. It will twist you, transform you, until you become a part of it. Sylvain felt a cold dread creep through her veins. She remembered the pain, the exhaustion, the feeling of depletion she had experienced after using the curse's power. She had felt a connection to the Frostwolf, a sense of kinship, but she had also felt a darkness, a coldness, that had threatened to engulf her. She looked at the Frostwolf, its glowing eyes fixed on her, its massive form radiating a strange mixture of power and vulnerability. She felt its longing for freedom, its desire to be released from the curse, but she also felt its hunger, its insatiable need for more. She knew that Kalen was right. The curse was seductive, it was dangerous, and it would demand a price. But she also knew that she couldn't abandon the Frostwolf, that she couldn't turn away from the possibility of freeing Eisenthal, of freeing Kalen. There has to be another way, she said, her voice filled with a desperate hope. A way to break the curse without sacrificing myself. Kalen shook his head. I don't know, Sylvain. I have searched for centuries, and I have found nothing. Sylvain stood, a new determination hardening her gaze. Then we will make a way, she said, surprising even herself. She turned back to the ruins, to the hidden chamber where Lyra had unleashed the curse. There must be something here, she said. Some clue, some secret, that has been overlooked. Kalen followed her, his expression a mixture of admiration and concern. He knew the risks, the dangers, but he also knew that he couldn't stop her. He had seen the power she possessed, the determination in her eyes. He had to trust her, to believe in her, even if it meant facing his own fears, his own doubts. There entered the hidden chamber, the air thick with ancient magic. Sylvain walked to the stone altar, her hand hovering over the strange symbols and runes. She closed her eyes, focusing on the ring on her finger, on the connection she felt to the curse, on the power that flowed through her. She felt a surge of energy, a tingling sensation that spread through her body. She saw images, flashes of memories, fragments of Lyra's life. She saw Lyra as a young woman, beautiful, powerful, full of life and laughter. She saw her fall in love with Alaric, a warrior from the village, a man who was strong, brave, and kind. She saw their courtship, their stolen moments of tenderness, their whispered promises of love. She saw the joy in Lyra's eyes, the hope in her heart. Then, she saw the betrayal. She saw Alaric's betrothal to another woman, a woman from his own clan, a woman who was suitable. She saw Lyra's heartbreak, her rage, her despair. She saw Lyra unleash the curse, her voice echoing through the mountains, her tears freezing as they fell. She saw Alaric transformed into the Frostwolf, his eyes filled with horror, with regret. Sylvain opened her eyes, her body trembling. She felt Lyra's pain, her anger, her grief. It was a pain that echoed through the centuries, a pain that had fueled the curse, a pain that had trapped Eisenthal in an eternal winter. But she also felt something else. She felt Lyra's love, a love that had been twisted, corrupted, but a love that was still there, buried beneath the layers of anger and despair. A love that yearned for redemption. The curse, it's not just about revenge, Sylvain said, her voice barely above a whisper. It's about love. A broken heart. A broken oath. She looked at Kaelin. The echoes of betrayal reverberated, not just through the chamber, but within their own tenuous bond. Where would they find the strength to overcome such a deeply rooted sorrow? Chapter 15. A storm of fury and fear. Kaelin stared at Sylvain, his silver eyes wide with a mixture of understanding and dread. He had always believed the curse was born solely of Lyra's rage, her desire for revenge. But Sylvain's revelation, her connection to Lyra's memories, revealed a deeper, more complex truth. The curse was rooted in love, in a broken heart, in a betrayed promise. Love, he repeated, the word sounding strange, almost foreign on his lips. He had lived for centuries under the shadow of the curse, believing it to be a force of pure darkness, of unyielding hatred. But now, he saw that it was something more human, more relatable. He remembered Alara, his own lost love, the woman he had failed to protect from the curse. He had believed that his love for her had strengthened the curse, that it had led to her destruction. But now, he wondered, was it his love that had doomed her, or his fear? His fear of the curse, his fear of losing her, his fear of himself? He looked at Sylvain, at her determined gaze, at the strength that she drew from her connection to Lyra, to the curse. He saw in her a reflection of Alara, a reflection of the woman he had loved and lost. But he also saw something different, something stronger. Sylvain was not afraid. She embraced the curse. She embraced the power that flowed through her. She embraced the love that was at its core. If the curse is rooted in love, Sylvain said, her voice breaking through his thoughts, then maybe love is also the key to breaking it. She walked to the altar, her hand hovering over the symbols and runes. She closed her eyes, focusing on the ring on her finger, on the connection she felt to Lyra, to the curse. She felt a surge of energy, a warmth that spread through her body. She saw another image, another memory, a fragment of Lyra's life that had been hidden, suppressed. She saw Lyra, after she had unleashed the curse, after she had transformed Alaric into the Frostwolf. She saw her regret, her remorse, her despair. She saw her attempt to undo what she had done, to lift the curse, to free Alaric, to free Eisenthal. But it was too late. The curse was too strong, too deeply woven into the fabric of the land. It could not be undone, not by Lyra, not by anyone. Sylvain opened her eyes, her body trembling. She felt Lyra's despair, her hopelessness, her resignation. She tried, Sylvain whispered, her voice filled with sorrow. She tried to break the curse, but she couldn't. Kaelin nodded, his expression grim. I know, he said. The legends speak of her attempts, of her failures. The curse, it is unbreakable. No, Sylvain said, her voice firm, her eyes filled with a renewed determination. It's not unbreakable. It's just incomplete. Lyra didn't finish what she started. She gave up. She lost hope. She looked at Kaelin, her gaze intense. We won't give up, she said. We won't lose hope. We will finish what Lyra started. We will break the curse. Suddenly, the chamber began to shake, the walls trembling, the air growing thick with a swirling, icy mist. The symbols on the altar began to glow, a bright, almost blinding light. Kaelin grabbed Sylvain's arm, his grip tight and urgent. We need to leave, he said. Now. The curse, it's reacting. It's fighting back. They turned to flee, but it was too late. The mist solidified, forming a swirling vortex of ice and snow. From within the vortex, a figure emerged, a woman with flowing white hair and eyes of pure ice. It was Lyra, but it was not the Lyra of Sylvain's visions, the young woman filled with love and laughter. This was Lyra the sorceress, the embodiment of the curse, the creature of eternal winter. Her eyes fixed on Sylvain, her gaze filled with rage, with hatred. You dare, she hissed, her voice echoing through the chamber, a sound like the cracking of ice. You dare to tamper with my curse? You dare to love him? She raised her hand, her fingers crackling with icy energy. A blast of freezing wind slammed into Sylvain, throwing her back against the wall. Kaelin stepped in front of Sylvain, shielding her from Lyra's attack. He drew his blade, the silver light reflecting in Lyra's icy eyes. "Leave her alone," he commanded, his voice filled with defiance. "This is between you and me." Lyra laughed, a cold, cruel sound that sent shivers down Sylvain's spine. "You?" she scoffed. "You are nothing. A pale imitation of Alaric. A prisoner of my love." She raised her hand again, preparing to unleash another blast of icy energy. Sylvain, struggling to her feet, knew that she had to do something. She had to stop Lyra. She had to protect Kaelin. She had to break the curse. But how? She was no match for Lyra's power. She was just an old woman, a scholar, a lover? The word echoed in her mind, a spark of understanding, a glimmer of hope. Love. It was the source of the curse, and it was also the key to breaking it. A storm of fury and fear raged, both within the chamber and within Sylvain's heart. Could love truly conquer all, even an ancient, all-consuming curse? Chapter 16. The Gathering Darkness. Sylvain struggled to her feet, her body aching, her mind reeling. The force of Lyra's attack had knocked the wind out of her, leaving her breathless and disoriented. But she knew she couldn't give in to the pain, to the fear. She had to fight. She had to protect Kaelin. She had to find a way to break the curse. Lyra's words echoed in her mind, a cruel taunt, a twisted truth. "You dare to love him?" Love. It was the source of the curse, and it was also, Sylvain believed, the key to breaking it. But how could she use love as a weapon against Lyra, against the embodiment of the curse, against a power that had endured for centuries? She looked at Kaelin, his body tense, his blade raised, ready to defend her, to sacrifice himself for her. She saw the love in his eyes, the fierce determination, the unwavering loyalty. It was a love that had been tested by time, by loss, by the curse itself. It was a love that was both a strength and a vulnerability. Lyra's gaze shifted from Kaelin to Sylvain, her icy eyes narrowing. "You think you can defeat me with love?" She sneered. "You think you can understand the power of a broken heart? You are nothing but a mortal, a fleeting spark in the face of eternity." Sylvain felt a surge of anger, of defiance. She would not be intimidated by Lyra, by her power, by her pain. She would not let fear consume her. She would not let the curse win. "You're wrong," Sylvain said, her voice trembling but firm. "Love is not weakness. It's strength. It's the most powerful force in the universe. It can create, it can heal, it can transform." She reached out and gently touched Kaelin's arm, her fingers lingering on his skin. She felt his warmth, his strength, his love. It was a connection that transcended the curse, a connection that defied the boundaries of time and space. "Your love, it was twisted, corrupted," Sylvain continued, her gaze fixed on Lyra. "But it wasn't destroyed. It's still there, buried beneath the layers of anger and despair. It's the source of your power, and it's also your weakness." Lyra laughed, a cold, cruel sound that echoed through the chamber. "You know nothing of my power," she hissed. "You know nothing of my pain." She raised her hand, her fingers crackling with icy energy. A swirling vortex of ice and snow began to form around her, a gathering darkness that threatened to consume everything in its path. Kaelin stepped in front of Sylvain, shielding her from the impending storm. "Run, Sylvain," he commanded. "Get out of here." But Sylvain didn't move. She couldn't run. She couldn't abandon Kaelin. She couldn't give up. She had come too far. She had risked too much. She had loved too deeply. She closed her eyes, focusing on the ring on her finger, on the connection she felt to Lyra, to the curse, to Kaelin. She felt the power surging through her, a warmth that spread through her body, a tingling sensation that started in her fingertips and radiated outward. She opened her eyes, her gaze fixed on Lyra. She saw the anger, the pain, the despair in her icy eyes. But she also saw something else. She saw a flicker of longing, of regret, of love. "Lyra," Sylvain said, her voice soft but clear. "I know you're in pain. I know you've been hurt. But you don't have to be alone. You don't have to be trapped in this darkness. Let go of your anger. Let go of your pain. Let go of the curse." Lyra hesitated, her icy gaze wavering. The swirling vortex of ice and snow began to dissipate, the gathering darkness receding. "I can't," she whispered, her voice trembling. It's too strong. It's a part of me. It doesn't have to be," Sylvain said. "You can choose to let it go. You can choose to forgive. You can choose to love." She reached out, palm open towards Lyra, a gesture not of aggression, but of openness. The gathering darkness pulsed, a visible manifestation of the struggle within Lyra and within the curse itself. What would happen? Chapter 17. Trials of Ice and Fire. Lyra stared at Sylvain's outstretched hand, her icy eyes flickering with a mixture of confusion, suspicion, and longing. The swirling vortex of ice and snow had dissipated, but the air remained thick with tension, with the raw, untamed power of the curse. "Forgive?" Lyra repeated, the words sounding foreign, almost painful on her lips. "How can I forgive? He betrayed me. He broke my heart. He destroyed my life." Sylvain didn't flinch, didn't waver. She held Lyra's gaze, her own eyes filled with compassion, understanding, and love. "I know," Sylvain said softly. "I know it hurts. But holding on to that pain, that anger, it's only hurting you. It's trapping you, just as it's trapped Eisenthal. Forgiveness, it's not for him. It's for you. It's about freeing yourself." Lyra's icy facade began to crack, revealing the pain, the vulnerability, the humanity that lay beneath. Tears, frozen tears, streamed down her cheeks, melting as they fell. "I don't know how," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I've been holding on to this pain for so long, it's all I have left." Sylvain stepped closer, her hand still outstretched. "You have more than that," she said. "You have the memory of his love, the memory of your own happiness. You have the power to create, to heal, to transform. You don't have to be defined by your pain. You can choose to be more." Kalen watched, his heart pounding in his chest. He saw the struggle in Lyra's eyes, the battle between the darkness of the curse and the flicker of hope that Sylvain had ignited. He knew that this was the crucial moment, the turning point. The fate of Eisenthal, the fate of them all, hung in the balance. He wanted to intervene, to help Sylvain, but he knew that he couldn't. This was her battle, her trial. She had to face Lyra. She had to confront the curse on her own. Lyra reached out, her hand trembling, her fingers hovering just inches from Sylvain's. The air crackled with energy, with the raw, untamed power of the curse. It was a moment of choice, a moment of transformation. Suddenly, the chamber began to shake again, the walls trembling, the ground cracking beneath their feet. The symbols on the altar began to glow, a blinding light that filled the room. A figure emerged from the light, a towering figure of ice and snow, its eyes glowing with an eerie, silver light. It was the Frostwolf, Alaric. But it was not the monstrous creature that Sylvain had encountered before. This was Alaric as he had been, a warrior, strong, brave, and human. His eyes, though still silver, held a sadness, a regret, that mirrored Lyra's own. Lyra gasped, her eyes widening in disbelief. "Alaric?" she whispered, her voice filled with a mixture of joy and sorrow. Alaric looked at Lyra, his gaze filled with remorse, with love. "Lyra," he said, his voice a low rumble. I am so sorry. For everything." He turned to Sylvain, his gaze filled with gratitude. "Thank you," he said. "You have freed me. You have shown me the way." He reached out and took Lyra's hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. The ice that encased her body began to melt, the coldness receding, revealing the warmth, the humanity that had been hidden for so long. Lyra looked at Alaric, her eyes filled with forgiveness, with love. She leaned into him, her body trembling. I forgive you," she whispered. And I still love you. As they embraced, the chamber began to transform. The ice and snow melted away, revealing the stone walls, the ancient carvings, the beauty that had been hidden for centuries. The symbols on the altar ceased to glow, the blinding light fading, replaced by a soft, warm glow. The curse was breaking. Sylvain felt a surge of relief, of joy, of triumph. She had done it. She had broken the curse. She had freed Eisenthal. She had reunited Lyra and Alaric. But the trials were far from over. The curse was lifting, and that meant changes, profound and potentially devastating, were coming. What form would they take? And could they survive them? The warmth, a stark change from the bitter cold, was spreading, but so was a sense of profound unease. Chapter 18. The Unveiling of Secrets. As Lyra and Alaric embraced, the transformation of the chamber accelerated. The stone walls, once covered in ice and snow, were now bare, revealing intricate carvings that depicted scenes of a vibrant, thriving village, a village filled with life, with laughter, with love. The altar, no longer glowing with an eerie light, was now a simple stone structure, its surface smooth and warm to the touch. The air, once thick with the chill of eternal winter, was now filled with the scent of pine needles, of wildflowers, of thawing earth. It was a scent that Sylvain had almost forgotten, a scent that spoke of life, of renewal, of hope. Kalen watched in awe, his heart filled with a mixture of joy and disbelief. He had lived under the shadow of the curse for so long, he had almost forgotten what it was like to feel the warmth of the sun, to see the colors of the seasons, to experience life without the constant threat of the frostwolf, of the eternal winter. He looked at Sylvain, his gaze filled with gratitude, with admiration, with love. She had done what he had thought impossible. She had broken the curse. She had freed Eisenthal. She had saved him. Sylvain felt his gaze, and she turned to meet it. She saw the love in his eyes, the relief, the hope. It was a love that had been tested by time, by loss, by the curse itself. It was a love that had endured, a love that had triumphed. She reached out and gently touched his cheek, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "We did it," she whispered, her voice filled with emotion. "We broke the curse." He leaned into her touch, his hand covering hers. "We did," he agreed, his voice husky with emotion. Lyra and Alaric, their embrace finally ending, turned to face them. Their eyes, once filled with pain, with regret, with hatred, were now filled with peace, with gratitude, with love. "Thank you," Lyra said, her voice soft and clear. "You have freed us. You have freed Eisenthal." Alaric nodded, his gaze fixed on Sylvain. "You have shown us the way," he said. "You have reminded us of the power of love, of forgiveness." Suddenly, a tremor ran through the chamber, the ground shaking beneath their feet. The walls began to crack, the ceiling crumbling. Kalen grabbed Sylvain's arm, his grip tight and urgent. "We need to leave," he said. "Now. The chamber is collapsing." They turned to flee, but Alaric stopped them. "Wait," he said. "There is something you must know. Something hidden." He walked to the altar, his hand hovering over the stone surface. He pressed a hidden symbol, and a section of the altar slid open, revealing a small, concealed compartment. Inside the compartment, there was a book, its cover made of ancient leather, its pages filled with strange symbols and runes. It was Lyra's spellbook, the book she had used to unleash the curse. Alaric took the book and handed it to Sylvain. "This book," he said, "contains the secrets of the curse. It contains the power to control it, to undo it completely." Sylvain took the book, her hands trembling. She felt the power emanating from it, a raw, untamed energy that both terrified and intrigued her. "But why are you giving this to me?" she asked, her voice hesitant. Alaric smiled, a sad, wistful smile. "Because you are the one who can use it," he said. "You are the one who understands the power of love, of forgiveness. You are the one who can heal Eisenthal, who can ensure that the curse never returns." Lyra nodded, her gaze fixed on Sylvain. You have a connection to this land, to the magic that flows through it, she said. You have the power to shape its future, to create a new beginning. As the chamber continued to crumble around them, secrets were unveiled, not just of a curse, but of Sylvain's own destiny. What would she do with this newfound knowledge, this immense responsibility? The weight of Isental's future and her own pressed down on her, a heavy burden in the midst of the collapsing ruins. Chapter 19. A pact sealed in blood. The chamber was collapsing around them, the tremors growing stronger, the air thick with dust and debris. Kaelin urged Sylvain to leave, to escape the crumbling ruins before it was too late. But Sylvain hesitated, her gaze fixed on the ancient spellbook in her hands, on Lyra and Alaric, their faces etched with a mixture of hope and resignation. "We can't just leave them," she said, her voice trembling. They helped us. They deserve to be free." Kaelin knew she was right. He had lived with the guilt of the curse, with the burden of his ancestors' actions, for centuries. He couldn't abandon Lyra and Alaric, not now, not when they were so close to redemption. "What do we do?" he asked, his voice urgent. Sylvain looked at the spellbook, her mind racing. She knew that it contained the power to undo the curse completely, to free Isental, to release Lyra and Alaric from their eternal prison. But she also knew that using the book, tapping into its power, could be dangerous, could consume her. She remembered Kaelin's words, his warning about the price of the curse, about the seductive power of love. She knew that she was walking a dangerous path, that she was risking her own humanity, her own soul. But she also knew that she had no choice. She had come too far. She had risked too much. She had loved too deeply to turn back now. She opened the spellbook, her fingers tracing the strange symbols and runes. She felt a surge of energy, a warmth that spread through her body, a tingling sensation that started in her fingertips and radiated outward. She found the spell, the incantation that Lyra had used to unleash the curse. It was written in an ancient language, a language that Sylvain didn't recognize, but somehow understood. She closed her eyes, focusing on the words, on the power that flowed through her, on the connection she felt to Lyra, to Alaric, to Kaelin. She began to speak, her voice echoing through the crumbling chamber, a sound that was both ancient and new. She spoke the words of the spell, not to unleash the curse, but to reverse it, to undo it, to heal it. As she spoke, the tremors intensified, the chamber shaking violently. The walls cracked, the ceiling crumbled, the ground beneath their feet splitting open. Lyra and Alaric watched, their eyes filled with hope, with fear, with anticipation. They knew that this was the final test, the ultimate sacrifice. They were ready to face whatever came, to accept their fate, to atone for their mistakes. Kaelin stood beside Sylvain, his hand gripping hers, his presence a source of strength, of love. He knew the risks, the dangers, but he also knew that he couldn't stop her. He had to trust her, to believe in her, to love her. As Sylvain reached the final words of the spell, a blinding light filled the chamber, a light that was both terrifying and beautiful. The ground beneath their feet gave way, and they began to fall, plunging into the darkness below. But as they fell, Sylvain felt a shift, a transformation. She felt the curse lifting, the weight of centuries dissolving, the coldness receding, replaced by a warmth, a light, a love. She felt a connection to Kaelin, a connection that was stronger, deeper, more profound than anything she had ever experienced before. It was a connection that transcended time and space, a connection that defied the boundaries of life and death, a connection that was eternal. Suddenly, they landed, not on hard stone, but on soft earth, on a bed of wildflowers, beneath a clear, blue sky. The air was warm, filled with the scent of pine needles, of blooming flowers of life. They were no longer in the crumbling ruins of Lyra's sanctuary, but in a meadow, a beautiful, vibrant meadow, bathed in the warm glow of the sun. They were free. Isental was free. Lyra and Alaric were gone, their spirits released from their earthly prison, their souls finally at peace. But their legacy remained, a legacy of love, of forgiveness, of redemption. Sylvain looked at Kaelin, her eyes filled with tears, with joy, with love. "We did it," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. He smiled, a radiant smile that lit up his face, his silver eyes shining with a warmth that melted her heart. "We did," he agreed, his voice husky with emotion. He leaned in and kissed her, a kiss that was long, passionate, filled with the promise of a new beginning, a new life, a new love. A pact was sealed, not in blood, as the chapter title foreshadowed, but in the undoing of a blood curse. The symbolic blood was Lyra's and Alaric's, and Kaelin and Sylvain were the beneficiaries. What would their future hold, now, free from the constraints of the curse? Chapter 20. The final confrontation of hearts. The kiss lingered, a testament to their shared ordeal, their unwavering love, their triumphant victory over the curse. Sylvain felt a profound sense of peace, of contentment, of belonging. She had found her place in this world, in this life, in Kaelin's arms. As they drew apart, they looked around, taking in the beauty of their surroundings. The meadow was a riot of color, wildflowers blooming in every shade imaginable, their petals swaying gently in the warm breeze. The air was alive with the sound of birdsong, of buzzing insects, of life. It was a stark contrast to the frozen wasteland they had left behind, a testament to the power of love, of forgiveness, of transformation. Eisenthal was reborn, and with it, so were they. But the transformation was not yet complete. As they stood there, hand in hand, they felt a shift, a change in the air around them. The warmth of the sun intensified, the colors of the flowers deepening, the sounds of nature growing louder. They were no longer alone. From the edges of the meadow, figures began to emerge, figures that were both familiar and strange. They were the inhabitants of Eisenthal, the people who had been trapped within the curse for centuries. But they were no longer the pale, gaunt figures Sylvain had seen in the village. They were vibrant, alive, their eyes shining with hope, with joy, with gratitude. They approached Sylvain and Kaelin, their faces filled with awe, with reverence. They had witnessed the breaking of the curse, they had felt the shift in the land, they had experienced the rebirth of Eisenthal. They knew that Sylvain and Kaelin were responsible, that they were the saviors of their world, the architects of their freedom. An elderly woman, her face etched with the wisdom of ages, stepped forward. She reached out and gently touched Sylvain's arm. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "You have given us back our lives. You have given us back our hope." Others followed, expressing their gratitude, their joy, their love. They were no longer afraid, no longer trapped, no longer alone. Sylvain felt a lump form in her throat, tears welling up in her eyes. She had never experienced anything like this before, this outpouring of love, of gratitude, of acceptance. She looked at Kaelin, his silver eyes shining with a warmth that mirrored her own. He squeezed her hand, a silent acknowledgement of their shared triumph, their shared love. But amidst the celebration, Sylvain felt a pang of sadness, of regret. She remembered Lyra and Alaric, their sacrifice, their redemption. She knew that they were gone, that they had found peace, but she couldn't help but feel a sense of loss. Kaelin seemed to sense her sadness. He leaned in and whispered in her ear, "They are not truly gone, Sylvain. They are a part of this land, a part of this rebirth. Their love, their forgiveness, it's everywhere." He gestured towards the meadow, towards the flowers, towards the sky. "They are in the wind, in the sun, in the earth. They are free." Sylvain looked around, and she saw it. She felt it. She felt Lyra's presence in the gentle breeze, Alaric's strength in the warmth of the sun, their love in the vibrant colors of the flowers. They were not gone. They were transformed. They were a part of Eisenthal, a part of its soul. As the celebration continued, Sylvain and Kaelin found themselves drawn into a conversation with the elderly woman who had first approached them. "My name is Alara," the woman said, her eyes twinkling. Sylvain's heart skipped a beat. "Alara. It was the name of Kaelin's lost love, the woman who had been consumed by the curse. "I know that name," Sylvain said, her voice hesitant.
Ilera smiled. A sad, wistful smile.
"Yes," she said.
"Kaelin has spoken of me.
I was his love long ago." Sylvain felt a pang of jealousy, of insecurity. But she quickly pushed it aside. She knew that Kaelin loved her, that he had chosen her. She had nothing to fear. "He told me what happened," Sylvain said.
"I'm so sorry."
Ilera nodded.
"It was a long time ago," she said.
"And I have found peace. I am grateful for the time we had together. And I am happy that he has found love again." She looked at Sylvain, her gaze filled with warmth, with acceptance.
"You are good for him," she said.
"You have brought him back to life. You have healed him." Sylvain felt tears welling up in her eyes again, but this time they were tears of gratitude, of relief, of love. The final confrontation of hearts wasn't a battle, but a reconciliation. A coming together of past and present, of love and loss, of forgiveness and redemption. Sylvain and Kaelin had faced their own demons, their own fears, their own doubts. And they had emerged victorious, not just over the curse, but over themselves. What did the future now hold? In this transformed Eisenthal, in this transformed love. Epilogue. Years passed, marked not by the relentless cycle of eternal winter, but by the gentle rhythm of the changing seasons. Eisenthal thrived, blossoming into a vibrant community, a testament to the enduring power of love and forgiveness. The once silent village echoed with the laughter of children, the chatter of neighbors, the songs of a people reborn. Sylvain and Kaelin, hand in hand, watched the transformation unfold, their hearts filled with a profound sense of peace and contentment. They had built a life together, a life rooted in love, in trust, in shared purpose. Their home, nestled within the rebuilt tower, was a haven of warmth and laughter, a sanctuary filled with books, with stories, with memories. Sylvain continued her scholarly pursuits, delving deeper into the mysteries of Eisenthal, into the lore of the land, into the magic that still flowed through it, though now tamed and benevolent. She wrote extensively, sharing her knowledge with the world, ensuring that the lessons of the curse, the lessons of love and forgiveness, would never be forgotten. Kaelin, freed from the burden of the Frostwolf, embraced his humanity with a newfound joy. He became a leader, a guide, a protector of his people, his wisdom and strength tempered by compassion and understanding. He never forgot Ilera, her memory a cherished reminder of the past, but his heart belonged to Sylvain, his love for her a constant, unwavering flame. They often walked together in the meadow where the curse had been broken, the place where Lyra and Alaric had found their redemption. They would stand hand in hand, gazing at the wildflowers, feeling the gentle breeze on their faces, listening to the songs of the birds. They would remember, they would reflect, they would give thanks. One evening, as the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the valley, Sylvain and Kaelin found themselves standing in their beloved meadow. Sylvain leaned against Kaelin, her head resting on his shoulder, his arm wrapped around her waist. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Sylvain said, her voice soft, filled with wonder. Kaelin nodded, his gaze sweeping over the landscape. "It is," he agreed. "More beautiful than I ever imagined." He looked at Sylvain, his silver eyes shining with a love that had deepened with time, a love that had weathered every storm, a love that had conquered all. "Thank you," he said, his voice husky with emotion. "For coming to Eisenthal. For finding me. For loving me." Sylvain smiled, her eyes meeting his. "Thank you," she said, "for showing me the way.
For trusting me.
For loving me back." They kissed, a gentle, tender kiss that spoke of a lifetime of shared moments, of shared dreams, of shared love. It was a kiss that sealed their bond, a kiss that promised an eternity together, a kiss that transcended time and space. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Sylvain noticed something shimmering in the grass at her feet. She bent down and picked it up. It was a single, perfect snowflake, crafted from pure silver, identical to the one on her ring. She looked at Kaelin, her eyes filled with wonder, with understanding. "They're still here," she whispered, her voice filled with emotion. "Lyra and Alaric. They're watching over us." Kaelin nodded, his gaze following hers. He felt their presence, their love, their blessing. He took the silver snowflake from Sylvain's hand and placed it on her palm, closing her fingers around it. "They're a part of us," he said. "A part of Eisental. A part of our love." And as they stood there, hand in hand, beneath the starry sky, surrounded by the beauty of their reborn world, they knew that their love story, the story of the Frostwolfs Oath, the story of Eisental's redemption, would live on forever, a testament to the enduring power of love, of forgiveness, of hope. The story, while ending here, promised an eternity of its own. The end.